You know those choices you make every day at the grocery store? They're actually rewriting international accounting standards. Seriously, that soda or sparkling water you just tossed in your cart isn't just about personal preference anymore. It's a critical data point in a multi-billion-dollar shift across the global financial landscape. Today, we're diving straight into the non-alcoholic beverages sector, looking at it through the lens of the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB.
So we really have to ask ourselves, are the classic ingredients in our favorite drinks, and yeah, I'm specifically talking about sugar here, creating massive financial and regulatory liabilities for global brands? For decades, the recipe for beverage success was pretty straightforward, usually involving a whole lot of sucrose. But that landscape has completely fractured. What was once the industry's absolute greatest asset has potentially become its biggest risk. If you're an investor or honestly just a curious consumer, understanding this shift is crucial to seeing which companies are going to thrive over the next decade and which are going to slowly fade away.
Okay, let's look at our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting the sugar shift, health and regulatory risks, the rise of alternatives, how we track this transition, and finally, how companies are managing these ingredient concerns.
All right, part one, the sugar shift. Let's see how nutritional concerns are totally altering the playing field. Think about the last time you flipped a bottle around to check the nutrition label. As consumers become way more aware of ingredient safety, those shifting preferences directly dictate market share. It used to be that a great taste and a catchy jingle were the only things driving a beverage's success. But today, nutritional content and ingredient safety are completely front center. The SASB standards highlight that these changing consumer perceptions are driving long-term shifts in purchasing decisions. It's not just a passing fad, it's a permanent evolution in the market. Companies that fail to recognize this are essentially just bleeding market share to competitors who are actually adapting to a health-conscious public.
Moving right along to part two, let's examine the health and regulatory risks acting as a massive dual threat to the industry.
Study after study shows that drinking high-calorie sugar-sweetened beverages is linked to some pretty stark health impacts. We're talking obesity, higher cholesterol, and a significantly increased risk of heart disease. The SASB framework actually calls out these exact adverse health consequences because, well, they're the root cause of the financial risk. When the consumption of your primary product is directly linked by medical studies to heart disease, your business model is inherently vulnerable. Consumers are reading these studies, doctors are actively advising against the products, and the long-term viability of high-calorie sugary drinks is being called into serious question.
And this sets up a classic pincer movement for these companies. On one hand, you have organic consumer abandonment. People are just choosing to buy less sugary soda. On the other hand, governments are stepping in. We are seeing direct taxes slapped on sugar-sweetened beverages all over the globe. This directly hits industry profitability because it forces companies to make a tough choice: either raise prices and further crush consumer demand, or absorb the tax and absolutely wreck their own profit margins.
Which brings us to part three, the rise of alternatives, or the great zero-calorie pivot.
To survive, capture new market opportunities, and frankly, reduce their legal exposure, the industry is pivoting hard toward healthier alternatives. They really have no other choice. A huge part of this pivot is the use of artificial sweeteners. These are chemically processed substitutes or food additives used to replace traditional table sugar. Also known as high-intensity sweeteners, these are the magic bullets the industry has used to offer the sweet taste we all want without the calories that trigger those health and regulatory risks we just talked about. By using these additives, companies can label products as zero-calorie or diet, instantly repositioning them for the health-conscious consumer.
But do these magic bullets completely solve the problem? Not exactly. You've probably heard of things like aspartame and sucralose. The SASB standard explicitly lists these, along with others like acesulfame potassium, advantame, neotame, and saccharin. While they solve the calorie problem, they introduce a whole new set of variables. Consumers are getting incredibly wary of highly processed chemical additives. So while a company might successfully dodge a sugar tax, they might walk right into a public relations crisis or face future litigation over the safety of those artificial sweeteners. It is a very delicate balancing act.
Let's dive into part four, tracking the transition using the SASB standards.
So if you're an investor, how do you actually know if a beverage giant is evolving to meet these demands or just dying out? You need hard numbers, right? Not just marketing fluff. This is where the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB, steps in. Now part of the IFRS Foundation, these standards act like a financial scorecard for sustainability risks, forcing companies to put their money where their mouth is. Instead of just letting a brand say, hey, we're committed to healthier choices, SASB requires them to disclose standardized, comparable data. This lets the market accurately price in the risks and opportunities of a company's whole portfolio.
Take a look at this breakdown. SASB metric FB-NB260A.1 requires companies to disclose exactly how much revenue comes from three very distinct substitute categories. They have to report revenue from zero and low-calorie beverages, revenue from no added sugar beverages, and revenue from artificially sweetened beverages. This is the ultimate scorecard. By tracking these three revenue streams year over year, you can see exactly how fast a beverage company is pivoting away from high-calorie, sugar-laden liabilities and whether they're relying heavily on potentially risky artificial sweeteners to do it or if they're leaning into naturally low-calorie options.
Finally, Part 5. Managing ingredients and proactive corporate strategies.
Because just disclosing revenue isn't enough. Companies also have to detail the exact internal strategies they use to manage these nutritional risks. The big question is, what exact processes do beverage companies implement to identify and mitigate consumer concerns before they turn into massive lawsuits? It's one thing to react to a sudden tax hike. It's another entirely to have a formalized, audible process to foresee these issues. SASB requires companies to discuss exactly how they identify concerns, track the specific problem ingredients, and manage the resulting risks.
Behind the scenes, these beverage companies are acting almost like pharmaceutical firms. They follow a clear process. It starts with running deep risk assessments and long-term toxicology studies. If an ingredient starts showing red flags in health data or consumer perception, they look to phase it out, substitute it with something more sustainable, or sometimes they just shrink the bottle size to reduce the overall calorie count per serving. And to really build back consumer trust and prove ingredient safety, they lean heavily on obtaining third-party certifications. We're talking about recognizable labels like organic, non-GMO project verified, or certified gluten-free. Consumers are totally overwhelmed with information these days and, let's face it, pretty skeptical of corporate claims. When a beverage company uses an independent certification, they're outsourcing the trust building. It signals to you, the consumer, and to the investor that the product meets a rigorous external standard, which massively lowers the risk of a consumer boycott.
On top of that, companies will often align their internal strategies with major international frameworks to assure investors of their rigorous compliance. For example, aligning with the Food and Agricultural Organization and World Health Organization's Codex Alimentarius, or the WHO Global Strategy on Diet, Physical Activity, and Health. By pegging their internal product development to these massive international standards, beverage companies can prove that their health and nutrition initiatives are structurally sound and globally compliant.
So what does this all mean for the future? As regulations tighten globally and our grocery habits continue to shift, we have to wonder which legacy companies are going to successfully navigate this massive nutritional pivot, and which will be left behind. The financial reporting standards have evolved to track this exact transition, and the data is out there now. We can see exactly who is clinging to the liabilities of the past and who is actively designing the healthier and financially safer beverages of the future. The real question is, the next time you look at the portfolio of your favorite beverage brand, are you looking at an asset or a huge liability?